passionate about? What's the best thing that happened to you this week? What do you do for fun? What's something that you're really into these days? What are you looking forward to right now? These are the type of questions that I wish we asked at dinner parties. Instead, we ask the most benign question. We default to, what do you do? What do you do for a living? And there are a number of reasons I don't love that question, one of which being it ties our identity to a job or a job title, and it automatically creates a social hierarchy based upon job title or income. I wish we asked questions like these. But what comes to mind when you're asked that question, what do you do, says a great deal about what you value and how you identify yourself. In fact, if I'm totally honest, when I travel, a lot of times I don't talk about what I do. I'll tell people I'm a teacher. I'll tell people I'm a writer. Both of those things are absolutely true, but it may be a little bit more on the nose to say I'm a family life pastor, but as soon as you say pastor, it just shuts down the conversation. But what you think about, what first comes to mind when you're asked the question, what do you do? Oh, that's very revealing, isn't it? This morning, we start a 4-week series called Plastic Trophies. It's the idea that there are a number of things in our life that we're running after, that we're pursuing, that once we obtain, once we achieve, they don't hold the value or the significance that we initially thought they would. And so I'll begin this morning with a question. I want to provoke the idea this morning that if you identify by what you have, when you lose it, you may not recover. If you identify by what you have, when you lose it, you may not recover. And by that, I don't just mean our cars and our houses and the numbers in our bank account, but the other things by which we identify are also possessions, such as titles like mom, dad, vice president, manager, beautiful, trendy, athletic, and strong. These things, too, we consider possessions. These things are ours, and we identify as, and I will tell you now that time and life will claim all of them from us. And so if those things are your ultimate, when you lose them, if they're the place from which you derive meaning and significance, when you lose them, you may not recover. You may not be surprised to know we're not the first to ask these questions of meaning, of significance, of what is ultimate and how we will weigh and value our lives when we come to the end of our days. So if you have your Bibles, I want to direct you now to the book we're going to just crawl all over this morning, the book of Ecclesiastes. And I'm giving you fair warning because it's an obscure book that we don't go to a lot. And so go now, start making your way there. If you get to Psalms, keep going to the right. We're scared of the book of Ecclesiastes a little, and that's largely because we never learned to read the Bible well. Because like the monologue of Job's friends, you cannot just take one or two verses or one or two lines out of a book and assume you understand what it means, why it was written that way. Rather, the writers are making an argument that you've got to read those individual lines in the context and frame of the entire drama unfolding. And so to understand Ecclesiastes, you've got to read all of Ecclesiastes. You've got to hold it in tension because there's a single through line that the writer is pulling. Ecclesiastes has historically been understood by traditional criticism to be written by Solomon, King Solomon, the son of David, written at the end of his life. And that's significant because it would have been written around 900 BC, but at the end of Solomon's life, we know that he spent a great deal of his life apart from God, disobeying God, and that disobedience would ultimately fracture the nation of Israel. So at the end of his life, he and his scribe penned this letter based upon everything he's learned, everything he's acquired throughout his life. In fact, the author, Solomon, will call himself Kohelet, which in Hebrew means the preacher or the gatherer. The idea is that for those of you that would desire wisdom, that would listen and shape your life around wisdom, gather, I'm about to preach. Gather, I'm about to declare. And we'll start, Ecclesiastes. Chapter 1, verse 12. Ecclesiastes 1, 12. The teacher was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men and women. Verse 14, I have seen all these things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Go back to verse 13. I have devoted, I have set, or I have dedicated my heart to these things. They're meaningful, they're significant. They're not a curiosity. What is my life going to be about? In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, he'll say, the writer will say, God set eternity in the hearts of men and women. These things are located in a precious place. I set my mind and my heart to discern what meaning was. Notice this next line. All that is done by all that is done under heaven. For the Hebrew people, it's as simple as God is in heaven and everything else is on earth. God is in heaven and everything else is on earth, meaning he's going to look for significance in life, meaning and lasting happiness from everything apart from God. I'm going to look for everything under heaven and see what will satisfy, what will lead me to contentment, what will lead me to happiness, what will lead me to satisfaction, what will lead me to peace. I'll look at everything under heaven. And then he foreshadows again and again, oh, what a heavy burden God has laid on humanity. That literally translates, what a rotten business. What a rotten business this is to try to find meaning under heaven. Richard Foster writes, no desire can be fully satisfied when it is outside of God. Purity of heart then is found in willing only the good, which is God. Now listen, and this is important, so many things we'll talk about this morning that we're likely to hold and identify as are not inherently bad. It's not a bad thing to be a parent all the time. It's not a bad thing to be good at your job. It's not a bad thing to have been successful in business. It's not a good thing to care about your body or to enjoy decorating your home or to have a nice car that you derive a lot of joy out of. The problem is when we make those things ultimate, when we confuse the gift with the giver. He says, I'm going to look at everything under heaven and see if I can find meaning there. Pick up in verse 16. I thought to myself, look, I've grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who's ruled over Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much of wisdom and of knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also to madness and folly, two sides of the same coin, wisdom, madness, and folly. But I learned this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow, and the more knowledge, the more grief. Verse 16, I thought to myself, literally means I spoke to my heart. I spoke to my heart and said, I will find meaning and significance by my degrees, by my intellect, by my experiences, by the things I will learn, by my intelligence. And I got to the end of that road and I found that all it did was lead to more grief, to more heartache, to more sorrow, to more sadness. I spoke to my heart and said, maybe I could learn my way out of this. And there are those of us in this room that have the degrees, the books, whatever, and we hide behind and can hide behind technical words. We hide behind experiences and pieces of paper on the wall. They become camouflage for insecurity. Psalm says, I tried, and it was meaningless. About a week or two ago, I was watching a movie with Pax, my 4-year-old. It's called the DC League of Super Pets. It's where basically like Superman has a dog and Batman has a dog, and it's animated. And if this is something that's like near and dear to your heart, I'm going to spoil it. There's spoilers coming, all right? In the next episode, I want some guy to walk out and be like, don't spoil it for me. But in it, there's a dog named Ace. He's voiced by Kevin Hart. And they're in the shelter, and he keeps encouraging all the other dogs. When we get out of here, we're going to the farm. And when we go to the farm, there are no leashes, there are no crates, there's tons of food. We can run, and we can play, and we can get wet. There's no worries at the farm. Of course, spoiler alert, as the plot develops, finally Ace is forced to admit there is no farm. I was just lying to you. There's no farm. The truest academics and intellectuals I know will tell you, I thought I'd get to a place where I'd have the key. I'd be able to unlock it. I'd be able to have the Rosetta Stone in it and be able to translate the meaning of life and significance and happiness. And now I've got a lot of tassels and some stuff on the wall, but It's fruitless. It was a lie. There never was a farm. Meaning never existed there. Let's go over to chapter 2, verse 4. Chapter 2, verse 4. I undertook great projects, Solomon writes. I built houses for myself and I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of trees in them. I made reservoirs to water the groves of flourishing trees. Verse 7, 2:7. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I owned more herds and more flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold, the currency of the day, for myself, and treasure of kings and provinces. These are taxes and duties owed him because he owns so much land. I acquired men and women singers and a harem, as well as the delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me, and in all this my wisdom stayed with me. Verse 10, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused to my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. When I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. He'll itemize all of the status symbols he acquired. Oh, I had the houses, I had the cars, I had the physique, I looked the part, I had the smoking hot partner, I had everything you could imagine that society would say you need to find meaning, and it was profitless to me. He says, I denied myself, verse 10, nothing my eyes desired. Literally in the Hebrew, nothing my eyes fell upon that I wanted did I deny myself. And yet on the other side of it, when I had all of it, it meant nothing. It meant nothing. Go to verse 10. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward. That's a farming term, an agrarian term, for the plot of land you're given. He says, my life was like a field. It had borders and boundaries, given time and space. What did I input and what fruit did I derive? Solomon says, with the field I was given, I harvested all of these things, and yet at the end of the day, it was profitless. At the end of the day, my life amounted to nothing. The field I was given by God and assigned by God produced all of this, and it was vapor. It was chasing after the wind. In 2019, the Harris poll surveyed more than 3,000 teenagers between the ages of 14 and 16 and asked them about their vocational aspirations. What do you want to do with your life? What job do you want to pursue and achieve? And they were given categories like astronaut, teacher, musician, accountant, professional athlete. And to the tune of 3-1, three respondents to every one said they want to be a YouTube star. They want to be a YouTube star over a musician, a teacher, a doctor. Now, before we bemoan the younger generation, when we look at their values, we have no one to blame but the person in the mirror, because we're the ones who raised them. I'll say that again. Before you bemoan the younger generation, you have no one to blame but the people in the mirror, because we're the ones that have raised them. So, what have we convinced them? Where have we convinced them meaning exists that they've responded and said, then I have to have celebrity and wealth to achieve it? What if we as parents and grandparents told students meaning and happiness exist, and to get that, they've concluded that I've got to be a celebrity and I've got to be rich? You've heard the adage of old money and new money. Old money looks like Vanderbilts and Rockefellers and names on libraries, and new money looks like Zuckerberg and Beyonce, who just bought a $200 million house in Malibu. I'm waiting for the invite. I think there's old status. Old status looks like having the nicest house on the block, and the car is always really clean and fairly new. It looks like jewelry, and it looks like fur. I think new status looks like limited drop shoes, $200 t-shirts, Instagram followers. It looks like Studio McGee threw up on your house. I think it looks like thigh gaps and big pecs. New status is just as intoxicating as old status, it's just changed slightly. But somehow we've told our children and our teenagers, and in some ways bought in ourselves, that meaning exists there. Solomon says, I had it all, and it was fruitless. It was meaningless. What have we done? Let's keep going. Verse 16. Verse 16, that's 2:16. For the wise man, like the fool, will not be long remembered. In days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too must die. So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me, all of it meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated the things I had toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether he or she will be a wise man or fool? Yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort. And still under this, this too is meaningless. Verse 20, so my heart began to despair over all of my toilsome labor. Note the comparison. The fool and the wise will not long be remembered. They'll both be forgotten. They'll both be forgotten. About a year ago, my grandmother gave Megan and I a bunch of her old photographs. And if you walk into my house right now, there's a gallery wall, and some of those are on the gallery wall. And I always think gallery wall sounds, you should see the wall. It's not very big. So it's a gallery wall. Come on into my vestibule. But there's this black and white photo, and it was my grandmother when she was a little girl in front of her parents, in front of this farm in the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma during the Great Depression with a Model A in the background. It was very precious to her, and so we framed it, and it's on our wall. I don't know my great-grandparents' names. I don't know their faith heritage. I presume they did something in farming. We're from Oklahoma, but I don't know what. And my son certainly won't. Fools and the wise will not be long remembered. And so Solomon says, even legacy and inheritance, reputation, is a vain bet for your life. If you're living with the value that my life will leave a legacy or an inheritance to those who come behind you, Solomon says that too doesn't last. Because you don't know how your kids are going to spend that money. And you don't know how that institution will spend that contribution, unless it's VMC, in which Linda Maley will make sure it always gets spent correctly. Yeah, that's true. Legacy, inheritance, it's not going to get you anywhere either. Okay, go over to verse 5. We've got one more. Ecclesiastes 5:10. 5:10. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. Verse 15, naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes, so he departs. He takes nothing from his labor that he can carry in his hand. This too is a grievous evil. As a man comes, so he departs. And what does he gain since he toils for the wind? All his days he eats in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Frank Gordis writes, guarding of wealth requires anxiety and care. The guarding of wealth requires anxiety and care. And even those of us in this room that wouldn't identify as wealthy understand this conceptually. When your income goes up, so does the cost of your lifestyle. The more you make, the more you spend. And those who maybe in this room are wealthy understand that with that wealth comes so much more expense, whether it be taxes or, well, the tires on your luxury automobile are just more expensive, and even the vacation home needs a new roof. As well as wealth increases, so do those who seem to be hanging around and eating all your food. He says, as income increases, as means increase, so does so does all the things consuming it. He says it's meaningless. It's just a chasing after the wind. Look at verse 12. The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. That the laborer sleeps contented with his income and how God has provided, but the rich man or woman lays in bed at night worrying about guarding their wealth and how to grow their wealth. Better to be the day laborer, better to be the working class who sleeps sweet, knowing God will provide, than be the wealthy person who lays there going, but what if it all goes away? What if my money was in that bank in San Francisco and it's gone? What do we do now? And my favorite is the last part that you may not have caught because I didn't. Verse 17. All his days, the wealthy man or woman, he eats in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Solomon says, even the wealthy don't know how to enjoy their money while they're alive. Although they're wealthy, they don't spend money on oil to light the lamp to enjoy the food they're eating right now. So what benefit is wealth? What benefit? Because you stay up all night trying to worry about how to increase it and how to protect it. And do you really even know how to enjoy it while you're alive? So is there resolution? Is there hope? Go all the way to verse 12 or chapter 12. Chapter 12. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, we'll start reading in verse 11. So the words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails. That's like a stick with nails in it to prod sheep along. If you are the herd that would love wisdom, these things will move you along. The collected sayings, firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. Verse 12, be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Or the making of many books, there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole or the entirety of humanity, to fear God and to keep his commandments. I want to spend our last few moments together expounding on those two ideas. To fear God and to keep his commandments. First, to fear God is to acknowledge that you are his. Created by God, created for God. This is more than having an identity in Christ. We are acknowledging that our entire existence is dependent upon God's act of creating and sustaining. That the potter will do as the potter pleases. That I am God's and God will assign me a portion. St. Anthony writes, as we rise daily, let us suppose that we shall not survive till evening. And again, as we prepare for sleep, let us consider that we shall not awaken. By its very nature, our life is uncertain and it is meted out daily by providence. It's why every one of us in here knows a triathlete that died of a heart attack at 50, and somehow that rock star who existed on coke and alcohol is 110 years old. Because God metes out our life daily, providentially, assigns us our field or our lot. And that's not a terrifying idea if we are rooted in the belief that God is good. If we're rooted in the belief that things will work out well, that he'll make it right, that God's not done even when you're in the tough spots in life. To fear God is to acknowledge that you are his, to do with as God pleases. And number two, true meaning comes from God. True meaning must come from God. Any wealth or possession that does not lead back to God is but vapor and profitless. Augustine writes, plenty which is not my God is poverty to me. Plenty which is not my God is poverty to me. That all the things we're likely to hide behind are gracious gifts of God, certainly, but we're called to be stewards of them, not make them the ultimate value, purpose, happiness, and intent of our life. Richard Foster writes again, radical dependence of the entire creation upon God is a central teaching of the Bible's narrative, and certainly pivotal for understanding that we have enough. We have no independent existence, no self-sustaining ability. All we are and all we possess is derived from God. All we are and all we possess is derived. For the writer of Ecclesiastes, meaning and happiness is a way of being that finds all its resource in God. It's a way of being that finds all of our necessary resources in God. The resource to be single another day. The resource to stay sober another day. The resource to know how to spend wealth when given tomorrow. The resource to stay in a difficult season of marriage a little bit longer. God is the root of those resources. The ability to continue to parent young kids when they're driving you crazy, that resource comes from God. The ability to love graciously and speak truth and wisdom to errant young adult children or grandchildren, whatever, the resource exists, but in God. When Megan and I have been dating for about a year, she was graduating from college, and she had signed up to go teach in Nigeria for 3 months. And so I take her to the airport at DFW, and she gets on a plane, and I wasn't going to talk to my then girlfriend for 3 months. And so she goes off to Africa, and I knew when I walked her to the airport baggage claim and went back to my car in the parking garage, and I grabbed the steering wheel, and I just cried, like I just was going to miss her so much. And I knew I wanted to ask her to marry me when she got back. And I was working at a church, and then I was only paid for like 20 hours a week, which is really just like rent and what it cost me to go to seminary. And so I needed another job. And so I found this job at Arlington Stadium where the Texas Rangers play. That's the baseball team, not the law enforcement agency. And some of you immediately imported Chuck Norris, and you're like, you worked with Chuck Norris? No. And so Bank of America had this scheme at the time where they put a big Harley Davidson out, and it was a commission-based thing for everybody that walked by that I got to sign up this information. Bank of America was going to try to give them a credit card or a bank account, and I got a commission for it. And you wouldn't believe this, and every pastor's a little bit of salesman. And so I was half decent at, as the game was starting, I'd say, put your name in the hopper and win a chopper or $5,000. Please help me buy an engagement ring. And so I did this all summer, and I hated this job. It was the worst job. It's Texas in July. You're like on like the second or third floor of the stadium. A lot of times you're working with people that are not in their right minds, and by that I mean baseball fans. But I kept showing up. I kept coming because I wasn't going to confuse the assignment with the purpose. My assignment was hawking this chopper. My purpose was to marry this girl. There are pressing assignments in our life right now, like being a mother or a father or a manager, or being a mentor, grandparent, a pastor, a police officer, a doctor. Those are your assignments. Do not confuse them with your purpose. Because one day those things will go. One day, life and time will claim your beauty and your strength, and no one will care how beautiful your house is anymore. Those are assignments, those are gifts, not purpose. I could keep showing up and hawking a chopper because I had a purpose. Your purpose is to fear God and acknowledge you are His and obey His commandments, that you would find resource for the good in life. And you would find resource for the difficult in life in Him. Would you do me a favor? Would you go ahead and, if you're able, stand up as we pray? And with your head bowed and your eyes closed, maybe God would bring a very specific situation into your mind right now that you would say, God, I just need resource for this. If I'm going to keep going, I need resource. If I'm going to have wisdom and clarity and direction, I need resource. God, if I'm just going to come to you right now and you're going to accept me and you're going to welcome me into your arms, I just need the resource of grace. But whatever it is, Lord, whatever is wealth apart from you is poverty. Lord, none of these things matter except to come to acknowledge we are yours and that what we need most can only come from your hand. I pray this week we would continue to access that resource and find in you all that we need for life and for godliness. Your gifts, Lord, are bountiful and beautiful. Amen.